Hi everyone, my name's Chris Meakin. I'm from Exicon Roofing and Solar. Exicon's been installing solar systems throughout Ontario for the last 12 years since Dalton Ginty shut down the coal-fired plants, and roofing for about 15. I'm also from Glace Bay, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, which is a walkable community. And when I first brought my daughters there about 14 years ago now, I got asked a question from my youngest, like, Daddy, why does it take you an hour to go get a bag of milk? And then the next year, I brought them to go get a bag of milk, and they realized it's because you end up talking to 10 people from the door to the grocery store, and then the grocery store back. So after you've talked to 20 people within the span of an hour, hour and a half, your kids now understand why it takes a little while to get a bag of milk. Glace Bay is also a coal mining community. So both of my grandfathers on each side were coal miners. I now call them energy pioneers, putting it nicely. The Sydney tar ponds are about 15 minutes from Glace Bay, and it's one of the worst environmental disasters that's ever taken place in Canadian history. And the cancer rates within a 10-kilometer radius of the tar ponds are, over 90%. So it's something that I grew up with. I remember skidding my knee on a baseball field that wasn't too far from the tar ponds, and then having that skid on my knee for the next 2 years. Dealing with climate change and the environmental impacts that human beings have had on Mother Earth is something that's been in the forefront of my mind for a very long time. So, people wonder what's going on with the solar system. It's producing enough electricity for the house, okay? And with net metering, which is what is now coming to Westport, you can use the electrical grid as a bank account. So during daylight hours, the first thing that happens with the house is it's being powered by the system. So as the sun comes up, the system does the work, takes care of all the needs in the house, everything that's happening in Westport and Watercolour, where there's no fossil fuels brought in, everything is electrified, everything is being powered by the sun, as soon as the sun comes up in the morning. At about now, actually, the house is going, or the solar system is going to produce more electricity than the house is consuming. That excess electricity is being sent to the grid. It's being sent to the grid through what's called a bidirectional meter at the side of the house. So everybody's seen their electrical meter and wonder what's going on with it. Most of the time, all it's doing is calculating what you're pulling from the grid, okay? Which is basically pulling electricity from a nuclear power plant about 300 kilometers away from here. What's happening with the solar system in conjunction with a bidirectional meter is as I said, you're meeting the load profile of the house, so you're offsetting all the electricity needs. You're powering that house with the sun when it comes up. Second thing that happens, you export electricity through the bidirectional meter out to the grid. And that meter is now calculating what you're also sending to the grid as opposed to what you're just pulling from the grid. So that's why I liken it to a bank account. So during daylight hours, you're making deposits. And then when the sun goes down, during non-daylight hours, that's when you're making your withdrawals. And we balance out the system where you're only producing enough electricity that you're going to consume in one calendar year. So you're balancing your bank book. How we figure that out when we're doing a retrofit on an existing home is we look at the hydro bill and then say, okay, well, had they put the system on the house a year ago, here's how much electricity they would have needed. Then we balance that out with a system design that equals the amount of electricity that was consumed in the last year. while we're looking at what's called the load profile, which is balancing out, again, how much you're consuming versus how much you need to produce to offset it, the design process comes into play. At that point, we're now looking at shading. We're looking at the slope of the roof. We're making sure that if there are vents on the roof, that's taken care of. We're making sure that if there's a chimney in a certain location, that's taken care of. We want to place the panels in the optimal position as far as orientation in relation to the sun. And the software in the last 5 years has become phenomenal. I used to be a golf pro. And now I know how to design a solar system on the roof, and it has everything to do with the software, that capabilities that we've achieved in the last half decade. This is what people make their decision on. They are inspired by the stories that they see in the news, whether it's what's going on with hurricanes like Gary mentioned in Nova Scotia, where I'm from, or the derecho that we experienced on the May 2-4 weekend, or floods and droughts in Alberta where my brother lives. This ultimately is what the people make their decision on, which is net present value, internal rate of return, and return on investment. And 90% of the time, it's a good idea from a financial standpoint. The people that end up going solar previously, right now we're in a different stage of things. Everybody, it's happening, mass adoption is happening. But previously, it used to be financial analysis and engineers. The engineers knew the equipment worked, and the financial analysis said, wow, okay, that's a good idea. Why wouldn't I do that? So on a home that's being built, like here at Watercolour, I'm working with Stefan and Gary to determine what the gigajoule offset number is. So instead of looking at a previous year's worth of hydro bills, I'm now going into modeling and saying, here's what this house is going to need going forward based on the modeling numbers. And Stefan gives me a gigajoule number, and then I need to produce a kilowatt hour production number from it. So it's a different scenario when the house is being built from scratch, but it's pretty accurate. And we don't ever try to overbuild them, because if we need more panels later, we can come back and put more panels on. So it's not something where you're thinking that you're spending. We don't ever want to have somebody spend too much money and then not consume the electricity that's being produced by the system. And that the modeling that we can do is, we're, again, with the software that we're using, we can actually place the home on that piece of earth that it's going to be put on, and then do the same type of shading analysis and orientation to figure out where the panel should go, as well as the roof layout. The battery option side of things is something that a lot of people want, but it's something that right now it's quite expensive. So having the ability to net meter and utilize the grid as not only a bank account, but basically battery storage as well, is important. Some people just say, no, Chris, I want my own battery. I'll spend $20,000 to do it. I want to make sure that during the next derecho, I'm going to have the ability to have electricity when the lights are out for a long time. So we're installing batteries as well. There's also a couple of different mechanisms that we can use at the inverter level that include a plug that would give you access to the system in the event of a power failure. And then you could use that plug to power the critical loads in the house, like the fridge, so things don't melt and go bad, stuff like that. So there are multiple solutions out there. The next solution, though, is the one I'm most excited about. So it's called V2X, and that's where the batteries that are sitting in the driveway are the ones that you're going to use to power the house when the lights go out. And that's something that's already being done in a whole bunch of other jurisdictions around the planet. Currently, through the Canadian Home Builders Association, as well as the Canadian Renewable Energy Association, we're lobbying the Ontario Energy Board in Queen's Park to allow us to do it here. And there's a couple of pilot projects that are already going on in Toronto, being done by Peak Power, that are paving the way for that. One of them is an entire office building be powered by 5 Nissan Leafs. The other one is it's a community north of Toronto where they're using the electric vehicles to power the homes. It's a microgrid scenario. So again, that lobbying effort is taking place because it's no longer a car anymore. Like the Nissan Leaf, for instance, which is about $50,000, there's about $40,000 worth of batteries in it. So now it's a bunch of batteries that you're driving around in. So why not take advantage of it in the event of a power failure and back up the house when the lights go out? And think about it this way. Let's say the lights go out for 2 weeks. Every couple of days, you put the car down to about 15%, drive somewhere else, power it back up, and now you've got power for a couple more days out of the technology that's sitting in the driveway. This is what I do all day. So, people think that there's not enough sunlight in Ontario. Well, tell that to somebody who has a $20 hydro bill because they have solar panels on the roof. There's an abundance of what's called solar irradiance in Ontario to power everything that we have every day for the rest of everybody's lives. Panel prices will get better. I'll wait. Nope, not happening. They've actually gone up in the last couple of years. One was because of Trump tariffs at one point, and now we're dealing with some supply chain issues. The larger industry where we're doing large-scale ground mounts in Alberta, for instance, those prices will continue to go down. But for residential purposes, it's really not a thing and hasn't been for the last half decade. The big thing that happened was between 2011 and 2016, panel prices globally went down by 90%. That's why I'm able to produce that financial summary at this point. Couldn't do that 10 years ago. That was the big change. Expensive to clean and maintain. No. There's 2 things that require operations and maintenance. One is a squirrel, so we put critter guard around it. The other one's a human being, so we tell the human beings to stay the heck away from them. Then you have no operations and maintenance. Solar panels hurt my curb appeal. No. Drive over to lot 5. Looks beautiful. The payback isn't worth it. When you cut your costs over 25 years in half, that, like, if your return on investment comes in lower than year 12.5, you just cut your costs in half, okay? And look at the manufacturer's warranty for the system is 25 years. That's why you use year 12 and a half. Most people, though, it's day one. As soon as the system is generating and you're net metering, that's when they feel that the return on investment just happened. If I move, I won't recoup the cost. So here we have NRCan in Canada. In the US, there's a different organization called NREL. They've been installing in the US for a lot longer, particularly in states like New Jersey and California. And the studies that they've done there on the turnaround time of a home, which is typically about 12 years, is solar system, houses with solar on them sell for 17% more, and they sell 20% faster. So that's part of the conversation too. You're future-proofing your home, you're making sure that you're resilient from the grid, but you're also adding an asset to the house. These are the other things that happen beyond the financial ramifications where you're now in control of your bills. You no longer suffer from energy anxiety. Energy anxiety is 2 things. It's putting on a sweater instead of turning on the heat. It's opening up the windows instead of turning on the air conditioning. And it's not going to the mailbox and getting a surprise when you open up your hydro bill, right? People that have solar on the roof where the sunlight is giving them all that they need no longer worry about those things. My house included. I don't worry about those things, and neither do my kids. They probably didn't before, but now I don't worry about them. And it gives you peace of mind as far as what you're doing to mitigate climate change. That, again, is usually the motivating factor that enters in people's mind to start the conversation. But I'm the one that tells them if it's a good financial decision or not. And not tells them, gives them the analysis so they can make a proper decision. This is where we're at. So see that chasm? That's COVID. What happened in the last 2 years with people being in their homes and wanting to feel resilient has led to this mass adoption stage that we're currently in. And it's something that not everybody believes it because where are they? Well, sometimes they're easy to see, right? When you're driving by them all day. Sometimes they're harder to see because they're on flat roofs of industrial buildings because business owners know it's a good decision. Sometimes they're on entire First Nations community, like this one that we did in Cochrane last year, where we fuel switched them away from diesel, and the entire community is now running on solar. Sometimes they're on schools, and sometimes the kids don't even know about it. So putting a plaque on the front of the school to let people know that that school is being powered by a solar system is a good idea from an educational standpoint. Sometimes they're on multi-unit residential buildings, like in Barrhaven, where this owner is powering the entire community with a solar system. And they've ultimately become the Hydro Ottawa in Barrhaven for that community. That's it for me. Being dragged off right now. I'm going to bring Stephen back up, I believe. Yes.